All right, then. It is March the 4th, so let's talk a little bit of nature, seeing as spring has sprung, and Aengus Kennedy from Nature Northwest has joined us now in the studio. Great time of the year, time for us all to get a wee bit more excited. There's a wee bit of sunshine and the evenings are getting longer, and it's even winter behind us.
It's a great time of year. Yeah, I love it. 3 minutes a day. That's what we're getting at the moment. An extra 3 minutes of daylight every single day.
Each day.
Each day. So this day next week, the day will be 20 minutes longer. That kind of way. So it's at its maximum now. We're getting close to the equinox, which is 21st of March or so. Which of course means more sunlight, more energy availability. So things are responding to that. The soil is starting to warm. Buds are starting to burst. Birds are starting to sing. The whole lot.
Nature is coming alive for another year. And this is actually National Tree Week, a week which is organised by Coillte, and it's the Tree Council of Ireland actually with Coillte, but it's a celebration of trees and all that they do for us, and how we should be planting more of them, I suppose.
Yeah, that's it. And when the weather's a bit better, it's a lovely time of year to get out to plant a tree, but the trees are still in their dormant phase, or most of them are at least. You'll see some of the non-native trees have started to wake, and the willows have started to put out their catkins and the hazel. But an awful lot of our trees, there's no leaves, the buds haven't even started to swell, never mind burst. And as the soil warms, all the root system will send out these tiny, tiny extra little roots like hairs, which are the ones that suck up the water and take the nutrients and whatnot. So the idea is to plant a tree before that happens, when the tree's still in its dormant state. And now the next few weeks is still the time to do that before they start to grow and need energy. Okay.
And on National Tree Week, if you reach out, is it to the council? They provide small trees to plant.
Yeah, they do indeed. Yeah, so Tree Council of Ireland, that's the thing. Or else go on to Coiltte's website, either or, and they will direct you to the right place, and you can apply for a few trees. I was in a school this morning, and they got 10 trees for free, and were delighted with themselves. School in Letterkenny here, and they've put those trees in. I am doing a little bit.
I suppose you add it all up, schools and and ourselves and so on, and if a lot of us were planting a tree here and a tree there, it all adds up.
Well, a lot of what we do with biodiversity action plans, for instance, there's lots of different towns and communities are looking to get small biodiversity action plans. Councils have their own big ones. So in other words, plans for nature. How can we bolster nature? Ireland has its own national one, just republished, actually, a revised one. But there's lots of mini ones for communities as well.
And it was just announced there the other day.
Ah, very good. Okay. Well, and more often than not, they're normally, what they're trying to do is they're looking at what nature they have, and they're saying, how can we bolster that? And really, it's about having lots of little mini pockets. Because the bumblebee can only fly so far before it needs a flower to get sustenance. The squirrel needs trees to get around. The bird needs its seeds or its nuts or whatever it is. So if we can create all these mini habitats, it's hugely important. It doesn't mean turn the whole place into wilderness, but if each and every one of us had a little bit of a refuge, planted a few trees, had some long grass areas and whatnot, all of that connects together as a big habitat.
So it's just to help nature along?
Just to help nature along, yeah.
Okay. And the 1st of March as well was the start of hedge cutting season, the end of hedge cutting season, and then the start of the prohibition. So we're just not supposed to be cutting. It's against the law now to be cutting hedges from now until August.
Yeah, it's against the law, and in the past we could be accused of having laws in Ireland that we don't always enforce, and I'm sure some of the listeners can think of some of those right now. But they're really trying to push on the enforcement of this, because we're starting to realise just how much trouble a lot of our nature is. And our hedgerows, our little linear lines connecting up, we're lucky in Ireland. Our farmers are very good at leaving hedgerows in place, to a large extent at least, and keeping them intact. In other countries, they rip out the lot and replace them with fences. And nature needs those hedgerows to connect from one little patch of woodland or wetland or whatever it is to the next. But those hedgerows, you need to let them flourish. The birds are already starting to investigate them. Insects are already starting to emerge. And if we are trimming them later on in the year, now there's exceptions for road safety. Obviously, there has to be, and that's fine. But the rest of the time, there's no reason whatsoever to be cutting a hedge from now right up until the end of August, and because nature really needs it. And when you think about it, it's kind of obvious. You look around at our fields, our beautiful green fields, but there's not many places for nature outside of those hedgerows.
These are kind of hiding places. It's places where we can nurture these wee creatures.
They're hugely important as hiding places if they're reasonably rich. Now, if you can see through a hedgerow, now the odd gap is okay, way. But if you can see right through the whole hedgerow, it has very little nature value. So one of the things that farm owners and homeowners, any landowners, are asked to do, councils as well, is plug any gaps with various different native trees and try and bolster your hedges that way. But they're important for shelter for birds. They're important for shelter for so many of the animals. You think of the hedgehogs that have been hibernating. They'll be following those hedge lines. The bats, as they appear soon, they'll be following those lines. And then for creatures just to get from one place to another, as well as having a shelter along the way, they're massively important.
And, a healthy nature around the countryside and abundant wildlife. It's good for landowners and it's good for farmers because everything's circular. Everything's there for a reason, and we're there for a reason originally.
Hugely important for so many reasons, and we're starting to realise that with our land management as well. We're starting to realise that if we have what they call nature-based solutions, NBS, nature-based solutions, and you'll hear that term more and more now that it's in the brain. And nature-based solutions are doing things like trying to slow down water before when there's a flood, before it comes barreling downhill down to typically the town, which will be at the end of the river, or having our hedgerows in place which will encourage more birds and spiders and the rest of it, which will help act as pest control. Then we don't need as much pesticide. One really interesting fact that stood out when I was looking at hedgerows there recently is a 1 acre field, if it has a healthy hedgerow around it, 48% of the water that falls in that field trickles down through the roots and through the root system, or is sucked up by the hedgerow. 40, so half of the water that falls in the field.
So you need less drainage.
You need less drainage and causes less flooding, etc. Whereas and then there's less runoff, and that all helps with water quality. Whereas if you remove that and replace it with a fence, or if you've got an unhealthy hedge, there's 2% of the water is absorbed by the grass itself and by the soil itself. Most of it just runs right off into the next field or the town or the whatever is downstream.
There's a walk that we do quite a bit actually, not far from here over Boherl, and it's a circular walk, and we were going around it a couple of weeks ago, and there was one section on the road where there's stagnant water, particularly on one side, but on both sides. And the road was alive with frogs. So this is spawning season, I take it.
This is spawning season, and the last few weeks people might have noticed, yeah, absolutely, the frogs have been coming out, and you'll still see them in your local pools and your local ditches. And this is something that has been going on for thousands upon thousands of years. Around about February, when the temperature starts changing a little bit, but when the light becomes more abundant, that daylight stretching from 2 minutes in January or late January to 3 minutes a day from middle of February onwards, the days getting longer and longer, the hibernating frogs wake up. The males are the first. They will head off to whatever pool they were born in.
They go back to that pool. Back
to the same pool. And so, of course, if in the meantime we've built a road or we've put in some kind of barrier, playground or whatever it is, they will hop over that and they will try. So hence we suddenly see so many on roads, because these are little pathways that frogs have been using for a vast amount of time before we were here, before we knew what roads were. And now, of course, we're splitting up their habitats. They're crossing these barriers. The males then will call in the pool, and they'll croak and they'll croak and they'll call and they'll call. And they are trying to attract the females. The females also make their way back to the same pools and then lay their egg spawn. You know?
So what's the time span from frog spawn to tadpoles to many frogs?
Yeah, so it takes a couple of months. So each female will lay up to 2,000 eggs, which is phenomenal, really. And if you look in a pool right now, this time of year, and it'll only be for the next few days, so get out to your local woodland or get out to your local walk and have a look in them. And if you stay still beside the pool, they'll disappear. But after a couple of minutes, you'll see the little heads popping up again. And each poor female will have a whole load of males vying for attention, quite often all piling up on top. And as the female lays the eggs, the male then fertilizes those. And those frogs spawn when the conditions are right, so the weather starts to warm a little bit. Within a few days, they will start to wriggle, the tiny tadpoles. They'll eat the food that's inside. And then within a week to 2 weeks, they'll be independent little tadpoles bombing around the pool, eating all the various different little bugs, eating little bits of plants, that kind of thing. And then they start to develop their little back legs first, and their little front legs start to come along. And eventually, after about 8 weeks or so, 8 to 10 weeks, the tails disappear and a tiny little froglet the size of your thumbnail will hop out. And then they spend most of their time outside of pools, actually, in wet grass, in damp places, but not actually in the pool.
Because they can live on dry land as well as in water. They can breathe them both.
Very much so, yeah. And that's the thing with the amphibians. They're amazing. So they have lungs, but they're also able to take in oxygen out of the water, and they're able to do that through their skin. So they can do both.
And when they're out of the water, they don't breathe through their skin. They breathe.
No, that's them using their lungs then. Yeah. Unless, of course, they're in a very damp place and they can still absorb oxygen in that way. But they're amazingly important little creatures because they will spend about 2 years. So if you find a frog that's maybe a bit bigger than a €2 coin or so, it's probably last year's frogs. They will get a little kind of half-size frogs over winter, hibernate for the winter, wake up, and then in their second year develop into a full-size frog, and the third year they start breeding. They're old enough to breed, so they need to have a safe habitat, a damp place, food availability for 3 years effectively before they can start to kind of replace themselves and spread their genes. But each and every frog from now on, right through until the end of summer, until the end of autumn, really, when they start to hibernate, is eating dozens of bugs. And we have a huge amount of frogs. So again, as pest control, they're doing a lot. If we don't think about it or know about it, but if all the frogs disappeared tomorrow, we'd be wondering why is there so many bugs annoying us and we're playing football or having our barbecue or eating our crops or whatever.
Is it true that they can change their colour?
They can. They're amazingly, and not like a chameleon. It's not that instant colour change. But frogs can look very different in Ireland, and we've only one species. But if a frog is in a very dark part of the pool or a muddy part of the pool, and you'll see a hop out, it'll be nearly black.
So it'll change to suit its surroundings.
It'll change, and it'll take it 20 minutes or so to slowly change the pigments in its skin. Whereas if you come across a frog that's been sitting on that lovely vibrant green sphagnum moss in the bog, and it hops off onto a piece of heather, it'll really jump out because it's quite a green colour. But then in time it'll start to merge with the heather.
How often have we been surprised by frogs? Never noticed them until they hop, and that's why they blend in with their surroundings.
And that's it, because they're the masters of disguise. Their hop is phenomenal. It's amazing what they can do. However, they're still quite easy to catch, so they're very vulnerable to prey because everybody and everything, even humans, eat frogs. So they're on the diet for an awful lot of our carnivorous mammals and for an awful lot of the birds as well.
As mad as a March hare. Where did that saying come from? Why are March hares so mad?
Mad as a March hare. Well, their breeding season is well and truly underway right now.
Right, that might explain it.
Yeah, and that's it. And the Irish hare, or often called the mountain hare in other parts of the world, but the Irish hare is one of our oldest known mammals. So there's very few mammals that have been here way before humans.
Okay.
And hares are one of them, and they're here so long that we have our own subspecies now, or at least it has its own traits. It's a little bit different, a little bit smaller, and doesn't change colour of its fur as much as other mountain hares. And they also have slightly different habitats. They will live right down at sea level. They will live in grasslands. They live in bog. They live high up in the mountains. Are amazing little creatures. But the mad as a March hare bit comes because suddenly they're not as shy at this time of year, and because the males are fighting each other to become the dominant male, and the dominant male will get to breed with lots. And then, of course, lots of females that don't want to breed right now, they're fighting off the males, and they will fight by standing up on their back legs and boxing.
Oh, yeah. Like kangaroo style.
Like kangaroo style, and it's quite an amazing thing. I'm lucky where I am living in outside Ramelton, and the farms around me, they leave lots of little areas for the wild creatures, for nature, and lots of good hedgerows connecting and whatnot. So the hares come in and out of my garden and wander through the fields. But you'll see them quite quickly zooming by at any other time of year. This time of year, they could be on the gravel beside the car, 2 of them or 3 of them boxing away. Maybe a female trying to keep off the attentions of 2 males who are busy vying for the territory, you know. And
we'll know they're not rabbits because of the size.
Size is the biggest thing. But when something's far away, is it big or how far away is it? So size is one of the big things. But the other big thing is just the shape of them, the length of their legs. Rabbits' legs, of course, are strong and longer than their front legs, the back legs are, whereas the hare is a whole different size again. Proportionately, the legs are much bigger, much stronger. They still have a white tail. They've got bigger ears. Size is the big thing. And speed, of course, they're the fastest of our land creatures.
Can reach speeds of up to
70 kilometres an hour. And the red deer is very fast. These characters are even faster again.
Okay. But they don't go underground, and maybe that is the reason they like to get away from prey. And they don't go burrow underground the way rabbits do.
They don't, and so you won't often see as many as you will with rabbits, because rabbits, they breed like rabbits. So you can have big numbers of rabbits in an area if everything is suitable. They of course make their warrens, their burrows down onto the ground. And there are some places, the likes of Dublin Airport, where there's big concentrations of hares if conditions are just so. But normally you wouldn't see nearly as many. So that can be one of the giveaways too. If there's lots and lots in a field, chances are you're looking at rabbits. But they will, if anybody has a dog and you think the last thing the dog might do at night time is spin round and round and round. And even if that's the dog's going to sleep on the rug in your sitting room, it'll spin round and round and round, and that's it answering its ancestral kind of need, or its instinctive need, going right back to when they were originally wolves. They form what's called a form, and a form is literally spinning in the grasses, in the vegetation, to flatten down an area. And of course, if you duck down into the grass, and I often do this when I'm out with school groups. I was with a school group in Carndonagh last week. It was cold and windy. And we crouched down in amongst the heathers and grasses, and the kids were delighted. All the wind had disappeared. It was quite cosy down there. And those creatures are doing the same thing for camouflage, for safety. And the hair will, just like your dog, will spin round and round and round. And when it's flattened out a little grassy area, that's where it goes.
And is it true that during the day that they have a different area? They have a resting area, and then they have an area where they forage, where they go looking for food.
Yeah, completely. So they'll have their safe area where they'll know they can rest during the day, and they do tend to move around daytime now more so than any other time of year. But dusk, early dawn is the times when they're happiest. They're out and about, and they're feeling that wee bit safer when there's not as many humans moving around, really. And they'll have a completely different area. They can roam quite a big territory. If they're living up in the bogs and up in the highlands, up in the mountains, there won't be as much good food for them. There won't be as much rich grasses. So they can have quite a big territory, quite a few kilometres. Whereas if they're down in the richer habitats where there's lots of good grasses and lots of wildflowers for them, then there can be quite a few in the one area.
And females are slightly bigger than males.
Females are slightly bigger again, and they have to be, because those crazy males are vying for their attention right now, and not always in the most pleasant way. They're literally trying to dominate them with their strength. So the females have to be able. So if you see two hares boxing in a field, and you'll see it literally looks like they should be in a boxing ring, and one is slightly bigger, that's the female saying, I'm not ready for breeding quite now, because they can breed pretty much right through the year, but right up until kind of October time. It doesn't have to be March.
And not just one litter.
So they're one of these creatures that their numbers, they're a hard one to study, because their numbers tend to spike and then tend to crash, depending on what's happening in their habitat. So they have lots and lots of babies to get over those issues, and they can have up to 3 litters in a year, and each one can have up to 4 young ones, and they call their young ones leverets. Leveret is the name of the baby.
Comes up in a table quiz now and again.
Yeah, it's a funny kind of word. Not a word we come across very often. But the little leveret, it's one of the reasons, if you see hares in your area, just be mindful of your pets, be mindful of your dogs, and mindful of your cats, because the mammy will put the leveret underneath a little bush and will feed it one time with very, very rich milk. During the night time, and won't come back again for another 24 hours. And it's relying on that leveret being there in that same spot. And if you or me or the animal or whatever is chasing it off, well, then mum will look for a while, but eventually, if can't find it. So not disturbing them for that first 3 weeks or so is crucial. And then after about 3 weeks, they're independent. They're born with their eyes open. They're born with fur, and they're quite fast, even in that tiny stage.
Is it true that some female mountain hares can get pregnant with a second litter while they're pregnant with the first?
They can, yeah. And some creatures can do amazing things like that. Bats can get pregnant, but they can delay gestation. So bats breed in September, but they don't start developing the fetus until March, April or so, kind of the next few weeks when they start waking up, which is quite amazing. Hares then have a different kind of trick. As they are still, quite close to giving birth, or getting to that stage, that last kind of term, I suppose, they're able to breed again, and they're able to hold that inside themselves and before the next eggs are fertilised. Quite amazing, really. And all a strategy, because they've evolved They don't consciously know it, but subconsciously they know that their numbers will go up, their numbers will go down. They need to breed as much as possible to keep themselves going.
Yeah, to keep themselves going, because what is this like some areas, 80% of newborns won't survive the first year.
Yeah, well, they're under pressure, of course, from humans is the biggest thing. They don't like going into areas where there's cattle and sheep, and you think, well, what's left? They were all over all of Ireland, but they're still holding their own reasonably well. You're still allowed hunt them for hare coursing. You're still allowed catch them and chase them with dogs, which it's a very strange kind of, it's becoming a more stranger and stranger sport. But unfortunately, the government this year, they nearly banned it, but then they got cold feet at the end. And I think the days of that kind of carry on are probably numbered. But they're under pressure from all sorts of things. And then our golden eagles, our white-tailed eagles, will occasionally take them. They're very important food for the fox, for stoats, for so many other characters.
Finally, a question. I was really surprised when several huge bumblebees flew out of the azalea bushes. I haven't seen them this early, or as early as February before.
I saw my first couple of bumblebees, I think it was mid-February, and that's certainly pretty early, all right? But I've heard other reports of there's quite a few around. And yeah, those really big ones are the queens. They've hibernated all year, or all winter, and they are looking for as much food as they can. They will make a little nest down underneath in the undergrowth, in the ditches or the hedges. Another reason to keep our hedges and the scruffy places going. And then they will lay up to 3,000 worker bees, and then eventually new queens. So something happens to that queen right now, and they aren't able to get enough food from the azaleas. So good on that person for providing a bit of food and shelter for them. Or if we decide to mow everything and kill off all the dandelions in all our lawns, dandelions crucially important because they're one of the first flowers to pop up. Well, then those bees won't have enough sustenance, and then potentially 300 or 400 bees that pollinate our crops, pollinate our wildflowers, won't appear, and next year's queens. So the knock-on effect is huge. Leave little wild areas. There's a lovely scheme run by the Heritage Council and the Burren BO Trust down the country, but they're starting to spread it around the country now, called the Hare's Corner. And it's such a simple concept. It's find a little corner of your garden, of your park, of your field, stick in a couple of small native trees, crab apples or something nice like that, and leave the grasses to grow, leave the flowers to grow. And then you can still have your football pitch, you can still have your farming, your garden, whatever it is that you need to have. But the bumblebee has its sustenance, the hare has a place to be safe, and so on.
Not a bad idea. And Aengus, thank you very much. As always, Nature Northwest.
Nature Northwest. So for Tree Week, a couple of years ago, Creative Ireland sponsored the excellent filmmaker Charlie Joe Doherty and myself to make a few little short movies on native trees. So I'm going to post one up every day on Facebook of a different native tree. Short little movie, 5, 6, 7 minutes. Learn about your oak tree. Today is the aspen. I posted up naturenorthwest.ie.
Okay, thank you. We'll chat